There is no doubt in my mind that Panerai has been gaining a lot of attention over these last few years, and there's no wonder why. So let's talk about 5 things that you must know about Panerai watches. Welcome back to Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, as always, and believe it or not, this is our very first Panerai video, and we are blessed with the presence of 3 Panerai watches today. But instead of going through each one individually and doing a review, I thought we would talk about 5 things that you must know about Panerai watches. Let's start with number 1 that you must know about Panerai watches. Let's begin with a little bit of the history. So in 1860, Giovanni Panerai opened up his first boutique in Florence, Italy. And this is where it all started for Panerai watches. In 1997, Richemont Group bought them and moved all their watchmaking facilities over to Switzerland. Then, at the beginning of the 20th century, they created their very own in-house movement. Now that is just a really brief overview of Panerai's history. There's obviously a lot more detail to go into them, but we'll cover that in another video because we've still got 4 more points to go. So let's move on to number 2. Let's speak about the families, what watch families this brand has. Panerai have 4 main lines of watches: the Radiomir, the Luminor Due, and the Submersible. The Radiomir is more of a classic model and is based on their original watch that is supplied from the Royal Navy. Now, if you look at the crown, it doesn't have those iconic crown guards, but depending on your taste, you might like that. Next up, we have the Luminor model. Now, when people talk to me about Panerai watches, 90% of the time they are describing a Luminor watch. And this was actually introduced in the 1950s to Panerai's arsenal and has become the most popular watch in or amongst Panerai watches. Now, the thing about the Luminor range and the Luminor Due, which we'll go on to next, is it is unmistakably a Panerai watch. Because of that iconic latch at the right-hand side, you will not mistake this watch for anything else on someone's wrist. And that's something that I love about Panerai. Yes, sometimes this watch can be that little bit too big for me, but I love the fact that they've stuck with their guns, they've not changed their core DNA, and it's unmistakably a Panerai model. The Luminor Due was released as a more dressy, classy alternative to the Luminor. It's slimmed down a little bit, and you can see that iconic cushion case is a little bit slimmer. And finally, we get to the Submersible, which is their dedicated diving watch. Now, something that I do love about the Submersible model, we've actually got one sitting right here, is the Steel Bezel. Now, in an industry that is going all ceramic, we are losing that rustic nature of a steel bezel. And that's why I love the fact that Panerai still sport this. I think with the cushion case, it goes incredibly, and on a side note, that white dial, that's cool. Now we get to the Chisholm Hunter famous giveaway, which is of course the Chisholm Hunter watch box to my left, showcasing these beautiful Panerai models. We literally have taken a year to get this into stock. We went through 8 samples to perfect this Chisholm Hunter watch box for you guys. And because you guys have subscribed to the channel and have been so supportive, this is for you. All you need to do is subscribe to the channel, comment with your favorite Panerai watch, and finally follow our Instagram, Chisholm Hunter Watches. Thank you guys so much for the support, truly, it means the world. Next up, coming in at number 3 is some innovation from Panerai. Panerai were actually the first brand to use bronze on the watch case. Now, this has become a bit of a trend in the industry recently, and mostly because bronze patinas over time. And what this patina means is every single bronze watch will be unique to the owner. That is a really, really cool detail. I do think that everyone should have a bronze model in their collection. But when you hear that they are the one that started that trend, it gives, firstly, Panerai a lot of credit, but also makes me turn my head to Panerai for my first bronze watch because they were the first ones there. Next up at number 4, we are going to rewind again and talk about Panerai supplying the Italian Navy with diving watches, and talk about the fact that they were supplying them toxic watches. Now, Panerai is iconically known for using large luminous indices, which are easy to read, and the history stretches back to the fact that Panerai watches were used by the Italian Navy, which needed these watches to be easily readable underwater. But what people don't know is at the time, the luminous material used in the indices was made with radium. Radium, just for your information, is one of the most radioactive chemicals in the world. I know, that's pretty mad, but they weren't the only ones that made that mistake. Blancpain made this mistake, Rolex themselves made this mistake, and when Panerai realized they'd made that mistake, they quickly switched over to using tritium instead of radium. Before we go on to number 5, if you have made it this far in the video, firstly, I need to thank you. And as a thank you, I've got a fun fact for you. Sylvester Stallone himself wears Panerai watches. And I remember when I got into the industry in the first place, I saw a picture of Rocky Balboa. Well, it wasn't Rocky Balboa, it was Sylvester Stallone with his Panerai watch on his wrist. And the interesting thing about this is that Sylvester Stallone is not sponsored by Panerai. He isn't an ambassador for Panerai. He just chooses to wear Panerai watches. And if Sylvester Stallone's wearing them, what does that say about Panerai? And on that note, I actually just got off the phone with Sylvester himself and he said to go to Chisholm Hunter to buy our Panerai watches because we're official stockists of Panerai. That's a total lie. But what isn't a lie is the fact that Chisholm Hunter are actually official stockists of Panerai. So click the link below if you want to shop any Panerai watches in the range. And finally, we get on to number 5. Last but not least, Panerai actually uses a special machine to test how their watches manage seawater. Since Panerai watches were originally used by the Italian Navy, they met harsh environments and came in contact with a lot of water. Today, the watches may not be used in the same harsh environments, however, many of Panerai's watches are still dive watches. As such, Panerai has put a special machine in place that tests their watches and subjects the watches to artificial seawater and chemical reactions to see how this affects the watches themselves. Now, this was a pretty cool detail to me because although you might not be putting it through the tests that the Italian Navy did, at least you know that for the money you're paying, your watch is tested to the limit and has the biggest chance of survival in those environments. I have to say, I am so excited to get these pieces behind the lens and to do a time and the wrist episode and go in depth about the movements and about the history of Panerai. But enough of what I think. What do you think about these Panerai watches? Is there any weird facts about Panerai that I missed? Please let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed and you've learnt a little something, please hit that subscribe button. My name is Harrison, this is a time and the wrist episode, and I'll see you next time.